Hello everyone and welcome back for some more Drag Race gossip, secrets and drama. So I'm back for another Have Your Say video, and this video is for Global All Stars episode 5. So today we're going to be recapping this week's episode, going through the results of the Have Your Say poll, and I'll be going through a little bit of drama to do with this week's episode and allegations of favoritism, as well as Ahura calling out a queen for using a cheap outfit. All that and more coming up in today's video, so let's get started. And just before we get started, if you'd like to join in the fun with the Have Your Say and watch Global All Stars, make sure you check out Paramount Plus, and you can use my link as an official partner, and you'll get a free trial to Paramount Plus so you can watch Global All Stars as well as a mountain of other entertainment. So please make sure you check out the link in the description and the pinned comment. And thank you to Paramount Plus for choosing me as an official partner. So let's start by recapping this week's episode. So the queens come back into the workroom after Miranda's elimination, and obviously they're very sad. And we see that Vanity says that she thinks that she shouldn't have been in the bottom, and actually she thinks that Alyssa and her group should have been in the bottom because she felt like Alyssa messed up her other team by doing choreography that only really helped her. The queens come back into the workroom the next day and they talk about Untucked from last week, where Nelenia kind of confronted the other queens and said that she felt like the others were underestimating her. And Nelenia said she preferred to just focus on herself and listen to others and move on, and she kind of talked a little bit about it, and her and Queen talked a little bit about it, and so did Soa, and there seemed to be some sort of resolution but also not, and both sides seemed to stick to their opinions about what they thought was the right thing. We then find out that the mini challenge for this week is the reading challenge. To be honest, I did not think this was the best reading challenge. I think reading is hard, especially if maybe you don't know the queens that well, because obviously the queens probably have to prepare reads in advance rather than obviously on the spur of the moment. But I just didn't think anyone was that great. There were a couple of funny lines, but overall I thought this was unfortunately a bit of a lackluster reading challenge. And it was announced that Kitty is the winner of the reading challenge. So we then find out that the maxi challenge for this week is an acting challenge called Booby the Shequels, which is obviously a play on the Barbie movie. And to pick the teams, the queens have to reach into a pink furry box and pull out a doll, and then the doll's matching outfits then assigns the teams. So we find out the teams are Kitty, Queen and Alyssa, and they'll be starring in Jurassic Booby. Tessa, Vanity, Gala and Eva, and they will be starring in Franken Booby. And then Pythia, Nelenia and Soa will be starring in Boobies of the Caribbean. Now, with these teams, one thing that I think is a major topic that keeps coming up throughout this season is favoritism towards the queens who speak English as a first language, especially the 3 queens who were on a RuPaul hosted season. And I will say, I did definitely think it was a little bit coincidental that Kitty, Alyssa and Queen were all on a team. However, from what we saw, the queens got the roles by putting their hands into the box, and it did look like it was done randomly. So we then see the queens actually rehearsing their lines, and then they go to do the actual filming. And I won't focus on this too much because it's the usual of they show some queens struggling and some queens not, but it's always quite difficult to judge whether this is accurate because often they'll throw in a red herring and make it look like someone's going to do badly and then they do well and vice versa. Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to actually now go through each team's final performance in the acting challenge, and I'll give my opinions and who I thought was the standout from each group and overall. I will just say from the start, I've said this before in other videos, but I'm personally not a huge fan of scripted acting challenges. I think that unfortunately the writing does tend to not be that good, and I don't think that's the queen's fault, and a lot of times they get blamed for bad performances when the material itself is not great to begin with. I personally prefer the improv acting challenges where the queens are given a kind of character, but then everything else that they say is up to them, because I think that's a fairer way to show their talent. So the first group up was Tessa, Gala, Vanity and Eva starring in Frankenbooby. This was actually possibly my favourite scene, although I don't think the writing was great and I don't think the distribution of the lines was great between the queens. I do think that this maybe was the more interesting concept because it had the kind of horror element, and obviously it's a play on Frankenstein's monster. In my personal opinion, Vanity was by far the standout in this group. I thought her role was clearly the funniest, but also I think what really sold it for me was Vanity's outfit and her makeup. Now, the outfits are probably provided by production, I would imagine, but if we just look at Vanity's makeup, I thought the stitching on her face to show the kind of different parts all stuck together like Frankenstein looked so good. I think Vanity really sold this role by changing her voice, making it sounding very monster-like and deep, and I really think she embodied this character and made it really funny. Gala did a decent job, but I don't think we necessarily saw enough of her, but she was perfectly fine. The one I did feel a little bit sorry for was Eva. Her role of being the Karen maybe could have been pushed a bit further. I don't think Eva really pushed it as far as it could have gone, but it was probably the more difficult of the 4 roles. So to me, it was just a little bit lackluster, unfortunately, and I think she kind of got lost. But I do think also that is mostly to blame on the script writing, not just Eva herself. Next up, we had Pythia, Nilenya and Soa in the Boobies of the Caribbean. This was probably my second favourite of the groups. On the first watch through, I don't think I quite got some of the more intricacies of the jokes, and then watching it again, I found it funnier. I also felt that this group was probably the most consistent in terms of every single person did a good job, and also from the script writing point of view, I think the lines were quite evenly distributed between the 3 characters, whereas in some of the other groups there were clearly some roles that were way funnier than others. I found it difficult to pick a favourite from this group because I thought they all played their roles really well. Nilenya did a great job as being the kind of bimbo character. That was really funny. I think though to me the standout was maybe Soa, because I wasn't quite expecting it because we hadn't really seen her be funny necessarily before, but I thought she really went into this role, really made herself look really silly and really leaned into the character. And then the final group was Alyssa, Kitty and Queen in Jurassic Booby. I will say, unfortunately, I think this was probably my least favourite of the 3 scenes. I really loved the Jurassic Park movies and they were a favourite of mine growing up, so I thought this had a lot of potential. But I think the writing itself was just not great, and that's not really the Queen's fault because you can only do with what you've got written on the page. I just don't think that it really made a huge amount of sense in the scene. I could kind of see where it was going, but I just don't think overall it really had the effect that it could have had. All of them did a pretty decent job. Obviously, I think Queen probably had the hardest role because she had to be a dinosaur / drag queen, and it was really funny, but I don't think that the writing just really was that great. I did appreciate, though, that they were trying to do stuff to make it a bit funny. Like, for example, I think Kitty did a few good improvs, like with the glasses, and she was doing that accent. And Alyssa was doing, obviously, a parody of the character from Jurassic Park, who is played by Richard Attenborough, who's British. So she was kind of doing a weird hybrid American / British accent, I think. It did kind of, to me, sound a little bit like her Joan Crawford from Snatch Game on All Stars 2, but it was still funny, but I don't think it was enough to save the fact that the jokes just were not that great. Okay, so before we go on to the judges' critiques and the outcome, I'm going to do the runway for this week, and the category was Brown Town. So first up was Tessa Testicle. She said she's giving you European fashion fresh off the Paris Mother Tuck-In runway. Then we had Galabaro. She said she is serving post-apocalyptic, and it's a reference to one of her favourite movies, Mad Max. Then we had Vanity Vane. She said this is an homage to the winner of Drag Race Sweden, and she did the hair for this look, and this dress is a complete copy of the silhouette that she does. Then we had Eva Le Queen. She said the inspiration for this look is the Fashion Week at Animal Kingdom, and it's feathers, fur, croc skin in shades of what? Brown. Then we had Pythia. She said she's serving ethical fur trade of the season, and she designed this look because she thought about her love of taxidermy and fur. Then we had Nilenya. She's serving you violin extravaganza, and she loves to be glam, but she also loves to be a bit quirky as well, and the music just comes out of her boobs and she plays herself. Then we had Soa de Muse. She said she is serving an homage to the first drag queen, William Dorsey Swan. And this kind of dress has a lot of ruffles and a fan, and that's exactly what he did. And she wants to bring this kind of story to the runway. Then we had Alyssa Edwards. She said this look is a little bit odd because she does have a clock on her head, and it's giving steampunk Alyssa stomping down the runway. Then we had Kitty Scott-Claus. She said she's serving Kardashian realness and sent her to Calabasas to film a S tape, and that'll be her next movie role. And finally, we had Kween Kong. She said this is quintessential elevated Kween Kong, and it's a deity from the Pacific mixed with warrior, mixed with sister, mum, nana, and cousin. And there's lots of details that lots of the women in her family made so that she could look like this. In terms of my favourite look this week, it was quite hard because I liked a lot of the outfits. I did really love Nelenya's because it was such a cool idea to have the violin on her body as the violin itself, and I thought that was a really interesting interpretation of the category, which was the colour brown. I did love Soa de Muse's though. That hair was just amazing, and I think this is probably the best that she has looked all season. This was a fabulous outfit. So moving on to the judges' critiques, and we find out that Alyssa, Kween and Kitty are the winning group, but Kween wins overall. And that means that all the other queens are in the bottom. We then find out that the bottom two queens for this week are Eva Le Queen and Gala Barrow. The two of them lip-sync to the song Take On Me by Aha, and Gala is announced as the winner, which means that unfortunately Eva is told to sashay away. Okay, so let's move on to the result of the Have Your Say poll. So question 1 was, who was the best in the reading challenge? And we had Kitty Scott-Claus with 37.6%, then Gala Barrow with 19.7%, and then Tessa Testicle with 10.6%. I do agree. I do think that Kitty probably was the best. Overall, as I said, this was not my favourite reading challenge. I think it was a bit lackluster, but I do agree that at least Kitty had a couple of funny jokes, so I think that she was the funniest out of that bunch. Question 2 was which group was the best in the acting challenge? And we had 64.7% for Boobies of the Caribbean, 19.4% for Frankenbooby, and then 15.8% for Jurassic Booby. And I can see that. As I said, I maybe preferred Frankenbooby, but that was more just because of Vanity's performance in it. But as I said before, I do think that the Boobies of the Caribbean group was maybe the most fair in terms of all three of the queens did a good job equally. So I can see why people put that one on top. But it is interesting because Jurassic Booby was the group that won in the episode, but they got the least amount of votes. But we'll come on to that later because I think that ties into what people have been saying about favouritism on the season. Question 3 was who had the best runway look? And we had Nelenya with 40%, Alyssa Edwards with 15.3%, and then Soa de Muse with 12.7%. I thought Nelenya's was an incredible look. I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like that before in terms of the queen themselves being the actual instrument, and it was also just so tastefully and well done. I also did like Alyssa's, but I just didn't quite get the concept for it, but I guess it doesn't really need a concept, it's just brown, but it did look extremely well made. But as I said, I did prefer Soa's just because I think it was a bit unexpected, and although it was a bit simple in some ways, it also wasn't because of the amount of detail, and I think that headpiece and hair just looked so good. Question 4 was, do you agree with the winner? And we had 78.4% for no and 21.6% for yes, so a very strong result for no. And moving on to question 5, because that ties in with it, it's if you answered no above, as in you don't agree with the winner, who do you think should have won instead? So we're going to ignore NA because obviously that's for people who voted yes above. So then the rest, we had Pythia with 19.9%, Nelenya with 17.5%, and then Vanity Vane with 15.1%. I do think that Pythia did a really good job, and her group was, as I said, probably the most consistently good. I do think, though, that I thought Soa was maybe the best from that group, or maybe Nelenya. I just think their roles were maybe slightly more in tune with what I think the character was. I also thought that Vanity was by far the best in her group, and maybe overall I enjoyed her performance the most, so I would have put her at the top, but I would have been happy with either of those three winning. Question 6 was, do you agree with the bottom two? And we had 84.2% for no and 15.8% for yes, so a very strong result for no. And moving on to question 7, because this ties into it, it was, if you answered no above, as in if you said no, you don't agree with the bottom two, then who would you have put in the bottom instead? So as with above, we're going to ignore NA because it doesn't count. And then the next one was Kitty Scott-Claus with 29.3%, followed by Alyssa Edwards with 23.7%, and then Tessa Testicle with 12.9%. And so Kitty got the most amount of votes with 29.3%. I do think a lot of this comes down to people saying that they thought Kitty's outfit was one of the worst this week. And I do agree it wasn't my favourite look. I do think that it was a little bit more on the simple side and it maybe should have been critiqued more by the judges. I don't think that her performance was the worst though. I think there were other queens that probably deserved bottom more than Kitty for the actual performance. I think Kitty did a decent job with some of the improv, but I do agree that her outfit was not great and it should have been critiqued. It's interesting that both Kitty and Alyssa, who were in the same group, got a decent amount of the votes. And I think this does feed into the perceived favouritism towards the English-speaking queens. So I think that does also factor into it. Question 8 was, who won the lip sync in your opinion? And we had 91.1% for Galabaro, with Eva Laquid getting 8.9, so a very strong result for Gala. And I do agree, although I really liked Eva as a competitor, I do think that Gala did a really good job in this lip sync and she did beat her. So I think this was quite an easy decision this week because Gala did a really, really good job. And question 9 was, who is the front runner, or in other words, most likely to win the competition? And we had 63.3% for Alyssa Edwards, 15.3% for Kween Kong, and then 7.2% for Nalenya. Now, this has been the same every week that Alyssa has come out on top, and I think this is because people think that the season is made and rigged for Alyssa to win, because she is an English-speaking queen, she's from the US season, and it's probably the most high profile. And we'll get onto that a little bit later, but this does seem to be a definite theme that has happened on every single one of these Have Your Say polls. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think the season is rigged for Alyssa, or do you think it's because she comes from the US franchise, which is the most popular franchise? Okay, so let's move on to the comments for this week. And my Patreon member Yael said, I enjoyed this week's episode. To me, Queen was the clear winner. I was howling during her sketch with Kitty and Alyssa. I was completely gagged that Galabaro was in the bottom. I didn't see that at all. Firstly, all these queens are sickening and so talented, but Eva La Queen didn't seem like a lip sync specialist. I was really surprised to lose her at this point. She was a strong contender and I'm very glad that Global featured her. I am very impressed with her. It just shows you that a strong queen could go home at any point due to the challenge. And my Patreon member Anna commented on that saying, yes, I'm very sad that Eva was sent home. And I will say I agreed that Eva was a really great competitor and I was quite sad to see her go. I do think that unfortunately she did not do that well in the challenge this week, but I did agree that her outfit was a lot better than what the judges said it was, and I think it was a slightly unfair critique because I think that she looked amazing as she always does, and her makeup is one of the best of the entire season. I don't, however, really agree with the fact that I thought Queen and Kitty and Alyssa did the best this week. I didn't think their sketch was as funny as it could have been. As I said, it was probably my least favourite of the three. I don't think that's entirely their fault though, because the writing of the scenes in general was just not great. But I do also agree that I was completely gagged that Galabaro was in the bottom. There was no way in my mind that she should have been in the bottom. She wasn't really shown that much in her scene, but I think she did a decent job. And I didn't agree with the critique that her outfit was messy. Personally, I thought it was definitely Mad Max. I got the reference straight away. So I was quite surprised that that critique is what ended up landing her in the bottom, because she did get good critiques for the challenge. So I was a little bit confused by that. Moving on to the comments from the Have Your Say poll, a lot of comments were talking about the riggery or the favouritism, and that seemed to be a consistent theme in pretty much 99% of the comments. So one of the comments said, so rigged, they clearly favour the Anglophones, Miranda and Nalenya are especially robbed, hate this season so much, they should just crown Alyssa and call it a day. Boring, the favouritism is really popping this season. And on a similar note, someone said, this episode was really bad, but I don't think it was the skits, it was the editing, yikes. And I do agree, I don't think the editing was great, and I do think that the favouritism does seem to be showing a little bit. It was very coincidental that the three English-speaking queens, or the three Ru girls from a RuPaul hosted season, were in a group together. However, as I said earlier, I'm not sure if the fact that Queen, Kitty and Alyssa were on a team together was deliberate. It did seem a little bit coincidental, but I do think that really didn't help with the fact that there definitely has been some favouritism this season. And one of the comments that came up a lot was saying that it's unfair to ESL queens, which is English as a second language, and the judging is making an iconic season hard to watch, or in other words, that there's favoritism towards the English-speaking queens. And I do agree, I do think there is unfortunately some favoritism that has happened. And it is difficult because the more you speak the language, obviously it is easier, especially in an acting challenge, to memorize lines and to improv and to be spontaneous. But I do think that they should have made a more concerted effort to try and adapt to the queens that don't speak English as a first language, because otherwise there's not any real point having a global all-stars if you're then going to only really focus on the queens that can speak English as a first language. And there were also a lot of comments from people saying they don't understand how Gala was in the bottom. And as I said earlier, this was probably the thing that really gagged me the most from this episode, because I thought Gala was no way the worst and she should not have been in the bottom. And speaking of favoritism, I think that is one of the reasons why this season has received a lot of negative critiques. And I saw that someone tweeted about this, that the IMDb score for this most recent episode is 2.1 out of 10. And that is, I think, the lowest that there's pretty much ever been of any Drag Race season that I've ever seen. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that people think that the decision this week in terms of tops and bottoms and elimination was totally unfair and there was a lot of favoritism. Okay, so let's move on to a little bit of drama this week, and there was a few different things that came from the back of this week's episode, so I'm going to go through each of them. So the first thing was that, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of talk about favoritism this season, especially towards queens such as Alyssa, Kitty and Queen. And for example, Tessa Testicle posted saying, "Wouldn't it be so funny if I just won a challenge at one point and became the ESL, or English as a second language, Avenger?" And Kween Kong has said a few times on social media that people are complaining about the season being rigged and the favoritism, but those same people aren't actually going out to the gigs and supporting the queens in person. And Queen retweeted Tessa's tweet and said, "Wouldn't it be funny if the fans in Europe put as much energy into actually paying to come see the queens in the clubs, or brought the energy they bring to the comments to tour companies so their fees go up? They talk so much bleep online but don't bring the same support in real life." And Tessa responded to this and said, "Kween Kong, they could never make me hate you." And Kween Kong said, "They better not, I'm your auntie." And Tessa said, "Damn right you are." And in general, Queen has tweeted a few other things because she has received a lot of hate this season and also some death threats, which is obviously completely unacceptable. And she has tweeted a few times giving her perspective on things. And for example, she said, "The thing I've learnt about the fandom who don't see us POC queens as good drag, you expect us to either play mammy or to be a struggle bus so you can give us permission to be confident, otherwise we're bullies. I don't need your permission, get to my level first and then we can talk." A Twitter user then responded to Kween Kong and said, "As someone who actively does support the dolls, what do you mean by bring the comments to tour companies? Sorry for my ignorance, but genuinely curious if that helps to support." And Kween Kong thanked them for supporting and clarified what she meant and said, "I mean, bring the engagement to promoters and agents. If the girls got as much demand in those comments requesting to see them and ticket sales for their shows, they would be touring and performing more and getting paid way more than they are now. The rates for Drag Race queens through Europe are low, yet when an agent books a bigger name, the GP flock to their shows. Bring the same energy. After receiving offers in Europe, I can only imagine how hard it would be for the girls. Every step they take is building the infrastructure. If the fans go for them as hard with bookings and showing up requesting to see them, their fees will go up and they will be able to build bigger opportunities for the communities there at large. How do I know? A master's degree in business and economics will do it." And on a related note, to do with this idea of favoritism, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of people online criticising the fact that the three English-speaking queens were all in a group together and that their group won, and that felt very rigged. And a lot of people were also saying that they felt like Kitty should have been in the bottom because of her outfit. And for example, one person who did tweet about this was Georges from season 14 and All Stars 9, and she retweeted a post that was about the winning team this week, and Georges said, "Kitty," and then put multiple thumbs down emojis. And this tweet by Georges got a lot of interaction, and for example, some other Drag Race queens also responded. For example, Kerry Colby, also from season 14, said, "I keep calling her Skitty, and I think I know why. My brain refuses to process her name, or her, to be honest now." Plain Jane also commented saying, "Born to drag bees." And Dahlia Sin from season 12 also seemed to agree with Georges and said, literally though, with the laughing emojis. And I did notice that Kitty has posted this look on her Instagram and Twitter, and she did get a lot of really negative comments. And just for example, they did have some comments saying, and you still have the nerve to call others basic, which I think is to do with the fact that during the untucked part, Kitty was kind of making some comments about Eva's outfit not being up to par, but people were saying that was hypocritical because Kitty's outfit was arguably worse. And there were also some other comments which I can't show because they were really rude, and that did include some death threats to people like Kitty. And just to make it clear, that's really not okay. That's really going beyond what's acceptable. At the end of the day, it is a TV show and it's made for drama. If you don't like a queen or what they're saying, that's fine, but there's no excuse to go online and be hateful and tell queens to end their life. One of the other slightly more random things that came from this week's episode was a comment that was made by Ahura from Drag Race UK Season 2. So Ahura posted in her Instagram story saying, "Not to be that girl, but I'm really about to be that girl. But aside from a multitude of frustrations with this global all-stars, one thing I cannot comprehend or understand when you're competing on an international worldwide level with a provided wardrobe budget is the audacity to offend your country in wearing AliExpress China-made costumes that we see every local girl wearing. You are supposed to be representing the peak of your country's drag. This is just not it. I've seen this not only used in the runways, but also one used for the promo. I just don't understand the thought process of, yes, this $29.99 printed cleavage bodysuit with stars and a thin wispy fringe is gonna eat. I just don't think it's giving the platform the respect that so many of us would have wanted, and it's not being bitter, I just think it's not giving the show level for fans to gag to give us a second season. But what do I know, lol? I'm just a girl from years ago with a controversial opinion. But I will also say some of these girls' packages have been very impressive. I'm just magnifying specific individuals." And so it sounds like from what Ahura is saying, the queens this season got a stipend of money to pay for the outfits. And although I don't think this has been confirmed officially by anyone, this was confirmed for All Stars 9, and we know that that was the case. So it's not too much of a leap of logic that that could have also happened this season. And some of the fans worked out from what Ahura said that she must have been talking about Vanity Vane because of the description of the printed cleavage bodysuit with stars and a thin wispy fringe. And so people then assumed that Ahura was saying that Vanity Vane shouldn't have used an AliExpress cheap outfit for her promo. I then saw on Twitter that someone posted a picture of a comment that I think looks like it was from a YouTube video, and it said, "Vanity Vane slayed so hard. T, by the way, Vanity told at a viewing party that one of the promo assistants accidentally broke her original promo look, so she had to use a lip sync outfit for her promo." And I did see lots of people posting about this, although I couldn't find the source of when Vanity said this. But apparently Vanity's original promo outfit got somehow destroyed or damaged by one of the production assistants, and she wasn't given any budget to help fix it. So presumably this is why she wore this for her promo look, which Ahura then criticised as being a cheap AliExpress outfit. And it seems that Ahura must have then been made aware of this fact, and Ahura then posted another Instagram story that said, "Okay, we got the breakdown that my comment wasn't valid in regards to promo look as the specific queens was damaged by a set assistant. However, why was AliExpress still packed in your case? No offense, but even being for a lip sync, you buy something cheap and basic and you stone that bee, you add belts and a bleep heel with a human unit, and you style the bleep out of that lip sync look over wearing a distinctive pre-made look. For context, I'm not digging, I'm saying this is the Olympics, like look at the sporting theme of your promo for awareness of what they are asking. I'm aware it's been hard enough on girlies with certain judging, but agree or disagree with their opinions, you should do your most best so that regardless of the outcome, you're happy walking away knowing you have the best version of you. And for me, the thought into some drag isn't much thought, more what's easy to fit a theme cheap. And cheap can be spenny looking. Some of my looks on my season years ago stand the legs of time and only spent $3K. bearing in mind some girls make some of the most iconic looks on seasons in 24 hours with unconventional materials. Time and money isn't an excuse for this season, baby. It's not at one queen, it's at multiple, and not just with this franchise, but I think this being presented as the top tier, like a World All-Stars after we just left All-Stars 9, it's not quite hitting. In the words of Miranda, that's all. And Ahora's post got a lot of traction and people were reposting it on social media. And for example, Tessa Testicle first retweeted both of them on Twitter and said, "Not too much on my sisters." And then she retweeted her own tweet and said, "I'm sorry, but I kind of live for this take." And so it looks like Ahora was saying, even though Vanity wore this as a promo look because her original promo look got damaged, but she still shouldn't have brought it for a lip sync look because it's an off-the-rack AliExpress cheap outfit. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you think it's okay for the queens to wear something cheap that's off the rack, or do you think that that's unacceptable even if it's a lip sync outfit? But in general, please remember to keep the comments respectful. You can give your opinion without being hateful, and just remember that death threats and hate is just not acceptable in any form. So there you go, there was the Have Your Say for Global All-Stars episode 5. What did you think of the outcome of this week's episode? And do you think that Alyssa is going to win the season and it's rigged for her? Let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to get early access to my videos as well as have your comments featured in my Have Your Say videos, please check out my Patreon and consider supporting me. It goes such a long way to helping support my channel and I really appreciate it. And I'll put a link to my Patreon in the description. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreon members who are amazing and support me every month. Thank you so much for being part of my Patreon. I really appreciate it and I really do love my Patreon community. You are all legends. If you liked this video, please remember to like and comment on the video to help tell the algorithm that this is a great video, and make sure you hit the subscribe button because it really does make such a big difference to my channel. Thank you for watching and I hope you'll join me again in future videos. Thank you, bye!